The silence after the roar is the loudest sound a player will ever hear. It is not merely an absence of noise, but a new and profound presence. It is the echo of 100,000 voices slowly dissolving in the concrete cavern of a stadium, replaced now by the mechanical hum of cooling systems, the distant metallic echo of a locker door slamming shut, the solitary hollow tap of cleats on tunnel concrete. This is the space where the game truly settles in the aftermath. It is where the adrenaline, that electric current that makes the impossible feel routine, recedes from the limbs. It leaves behind only the raw material of the body and the unedited film of the mind. For most, this silence is a temporary sanctuary, a decompression chamber between wars. But for some, this silence becomes permanent. It is the first note of a new and unfamiliar life, a stark reality where the man who walked into that arena never truly walks out again. He is someone else now. We measure the sport in seasons, a beginning, a middle, an end. We etch the timeline in wins and losses, in statistics that take on the weight of scripture. But there exists another calendar, a private one kept behind the eyes of the men inside the uniforms. This calendar is not marked by games, but by impacts, by concussions whose kaleidoscopic lights never fully stop flickering at the edges of vision, by the knee injury that stole a half step of speed, and with it an entire career's potential, by the shoulder that never quite seated correctly again, a constant ache as precise as a clock. And for a select, haunted fraternity, their personal history is divided by a single, definitive line. There is the season before, and then there is the final season. I am not speaking of their last registered year on a league roster. I am speaking of the last season they were recognizably, fundamentally themselves. The last season the playbook unfolded in their mind with instinctive clarity, not through a constant, grinding effort against a gathering fog. The last season their body was a precise instrument of will, not a cage of chronic pain. The last season they were whole. I think of Mike Webster as one always must. The Hall of Fame center, the Iron Man of the Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty, a symbol of brutal, unwavering reliability. He played in 177 consecutive games. He was the rock upon which 4 championships were built. Years after the cheers faded, he was found living in his pickup truck, sleeping in train stations, using a taser to electrocute himself into unconsciousness, just to steal a few hours of relief from the pain and the chaos in his mind. His final season, the one where Mike Webster was truly gone, was a slow, silent unraveling that happened in plain sight and yet was seen by almost no one. It was a private earthquake. Then I think of Junior So. His smile was a force of nature, capable of lighting up an entire city. His energy was boundless, the definitive pulse of every defense he ever commanded. 12 Pro Bowls, a legend in San Diego. His final season ended not on grass under a floodlight, but in his oceanfront home, with a gunshot wound to the chest. He left his brain to science, a final, devastating act of testimony, because the words had failed him. His brain told the story his heart could not. But I also think of the names you do not know. The journeymen, the practice squad warriors, the men who stood on the sidelines for years, absorbing the same violent practice repetitions, the same culture, for a fraction of the pay and none of the fame. Their final seasons are private, quiet tragedies. You might glimpse them in the subtle tremor of a hand holding a drink at a charity golf event. You see it in the momentary vacancy behind the eyes during a conversation about the old days. A flicker of confusion as a familiar anecdote loses its thread. You hear it in the long pauses over the phone, the struggle to find a word that once came instantly. Their final seasons are the true legacy of the game, written in neurology and scar tissue, not in record books. What transpires in that final season? What is the specific catalyst? Was it a single catastrophic collision under the blinding glare of a Monday night spotlight, a hit replayed for days on television? Or was it something far more insidious? The slow, steady accumulation of 10,000 smaller blows. The subconscious rattle of the brain against the skull during a routine tackle. The repeated, subconcussive jolts endured on every play of every practice, day after day, year after year. The official narrative often paints this as a mystery, An unfortunate but unpredictable cost of doing business in a violent arena. A tragic roll of the dice. But what if that is a comforting fiction? What if a significant number of these final seasons were not random accidents, but predictable, even calculated, outcomes within a system engineered to maximize physical performance while strategically minimizing long-term liability? This leads us to the uncomfortable, hidden heart of the matter. Consider the very architecture of the game itself. The signals, the play calls, the intricate dance of deception and revelation between offense and defense. We celebrate the quarterback reading the defense, the linebacker diagnosing the play. We call it chess. But what if that chess game was rigged? What if one player could see the other's moves before they were made? When a defensive player knows the offensive play because he has stolen the signal or decoded the tendency, he is no longer just reacting. He is hunting. He is positioned not just to make a tackle, but to deliver impact with maximum force, perfect leverage, and devastating efficient violence. He transforms from participant to predator. The quarterback dropping back for a deep pass finds a 300-pound defensive end, who knew the snap count, already in his chest. The wide receiver cutting across the middle on a slant route meets not open space, but a linebacker who began moving to the interception point the moment the receiver broke his stance. The physical violence of the game is not just maintained in these instances. It is amplified, weaponized, and made profoundly more dangerous by knowledge. This is the dark, unspoken calculus of the hidden war within the war. It is a conflict waged not with muscles and speed alone, but with information, with espionage, with stolen signs and cracked codes. We, the audience, celebrate the brilliant results. The game-changing interception returned for a touchdown. The blindside sack that forces a season-altering fumble. The perfectly timed hit that separates a receiver from the ball and, too often, from his senses. We package these moments on highlight reels scored with thunderous music. We anoint the perpetrators as geniuses, students of the game, film savants. And often they are. But I am forced to ask a corrosive question. What is the human price of that genius? When a championship is secured, when a legacy is cemented, not solely through superior athleticism or collective will, but through a clandestine, frequently illegal information advantage, what is the true value of that victory? And for the man on the receiving end of that perfectly informed, ruthlessly executed collision, the hit that might not have been so catastrophic had the play remained a mystery, did his final season begin in that very instant? Did the slow fade into darkness originate with a betrayal of the game's basic covenant? The stories the National Football League sells are magnificent and simple. They are tales of triumph over adversity, of dynasty and destiny, of sheer will manifesting victory. History, as always, is written by the winners, and they possess the exclusive power to edit the footnotes, to dismiss the whispers as sour grapes, to cloak inconvenient truths in the majestic cloak of competition. This series is about those footnotes. It is about the blank spaces in the official record, the rumors that simmered for decades before boiling over into scandal, the allegations that were laughed away until the evidence became too voluminous, too explicit, to ignore. This is an investigation into the hidden hand signals, the stolen playbooks, the clandestine filming, the systematic, institutionalized deception that has altered the trajectory of franchises and decided the possession of the Lombardi Trophy itself. We are embarking on a journey into the NFL's most fiercely guarded secret. That for generations, a shadow war of espionage has raged on the sidelines, in the coaches' booths, and in the film rooms. A war that has corrupted the fundamental fairness of competition, stolen the purity of victory, and left a trail of broken men in its wake. Their final seasons, those silent, painful aftermaths, are the living testament to that war. This is their story, and it is the story of the wins that were borrowed, the rings that are tarnished, and the history that demands a ruthless, unflinching rewrite. The game of football, at its core, is a battle for territory. 10 yards, for downs, a brutal, geometric grind forward or backward. We see the physical manifestation of this war every Sunday. The collision of linemen, the pursuit of the ball carrier, the catch made in a cocoon of violence. This is the visible war, the one recorded in statistics and on highlight reels. It is the war we celebrate. But beneath this, hidden in the hand signals from sideline to quarterback, in the intricate dance of personnel groupings, in the silent language of tap 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 on a helmet, there rages another war entirely. This is a clandestine conflict, a shadow war of information. Its weapons are stolen signals, decrypted tendencies, and illicit surveillance. Its soldiers are not just players, but coaches, video assistants, and mysterious football research departments. And its trophies are not just yards, but championships, legacies, and a place in history. This shadow war has a name, but it is not found in any official NFL record. It is called Getting an Edge. And for decades, it has been the dirty, open secret of professional football. My name is Narrator Name, and for 2 years, I have traversed the country, speaking to over 100 former players, coaches, team executives, and individuals who operated in the gray spaces of competition. This series is the result of that investigation. Our thesis is direct and unsettling. The history of the modern NFL is not merely a story of athletic excellence and strategic genius. It is equally a story of systematic information theft, institutionalized deception, and a competitive ethic that has repeatedly broken its own rules in the pursuit of the ultimate prize. The consequences of this shadow war extend far beyond a lost down or a misplaced fine. They have directly altered the destination of the Lombardi Trophy, forged fraudulent legacies, and fundamentally corrupted the integrity of the sport's most cherished moments. To understand how deeply this impulse is woven into the fabric of the game, you must start at the beginning, long before parabolic microphones and camera lenses. Football has always been a game of codes. In its earliest, rudimentary forms, plays were called with numbers shouted into the huddle. The first act of espionage was simple: listen. A defensive player with a sharp ear and a sharper memory could pick up a pattern. They always run on 32 dive when the fullback is aligned left. This was gamesmanship. But as the game professionalized and the stakes grew, so did the sophistication of the theft. The 1960s and 70s saw the rise of the spotter in the press box, armed with binoculars and a walkie-talkie, trying to read the lips of opposing coaches or decipher their sideline signals. It was an analog arms race. Hall of Fame coach Tom Landry of the Dallas Cowboys famously employed a former CIA agent to help design complex defensive schemes, and it is widely believed to think like an intelligence operative in studying opponents. The line between strategic preparation and active espionage was blurring. The culture of the NFL nurtured this. It is a league built on a foundation of paranoia and secrecy. Playbooks are treated like state secrets. Meetings are held behind closed doors with shredded itineraries. Former New England Patriots executive Scott Pioli once described the environment perfectly. The league is built on a need-to-know basis, and nobody thinks you need to know anything. This inherent distrust of the outside world, including other teams, creates a petri dish for ethical compromise. When everyone believes their opponent is stealing first becomes a strategic imperative, not a moral failing. It becomes part of the bottom-line culture immortalized by Oakland Raiders owner Al Davis. Just win, baby. The methods were irrelevant. Only the result mattered. This series will track the evolution of this shadow war through its most critical and damning battlefields. We will begin in the 1970s with the Pittsburgh Steelers, a dynasty built on a terrifying defense. Their defensive coordinator, Bud Carson, and later players like Mel Blount have spoken openly about their intense study of opponent signals. They didn't just watch film. They studied the sideline, the quarterback's footwork, the center's hand position. They systematized theft. From there, we will move to the strategic revolution of the 1980s, led by Bill Walsh and the San Diego Chargers. Walsh's West Coast offense was a symphony of precisely timed routes. To stop it, defenses felt they had to know the play before the snap. The pressure to cheat grew in direct proportion to the strategic genius on the field. The narrative will then accelerate into the 1990s and the dawn of the modern surveillance age. We will examine the Buffalo Bills' no-huddle offense, which led to accusations and counter-accusations of signal jamming and defensive fake injuries. We will delve into the notorious allegations surrounding the 1998 AFC Championship game between the Denver Broncos and the New York Jets, where Jets coach Bill Parcells accused the Broncos of using an electronic bug to intercept his team's defensive signals. Parcells famously said, "They knew what we were doing. They were calling out our plays. The league investigated and found no evidence, but the accusation, from a respected coach, hangs over that championship like a specter. All of this historical context is a prelude to the central, defining scandal of this shadow war: Spygate. In 2007, the New England Patriots were caught videotaping the New York Jets' defensive signals from an unauthorized location, a direct violation of a league memo sent to all teams just days before. The fallout was immediate, but the truth was carefully managed. The NFL confiscated the tapes and destroyed them. Commissioner Roger Goodell fined the Patriots $500,000, fined coach Bill Belichick $250,000, and stripped the team of a first-round draft pick. The official story was that this was an isolated incident, a misinterpretation of the rules. But through the testimony of former Patriots employees and the painstaking work of journalists like ESPN's Don Van Natta Jr. and Seth Wickersham, a different truth emerged. This was not an isolated incident. It was a systemic, years-long operation. The Patriots had been taping signals of opponents for years, building a library of stolen information. Former video assistant Matt Walsh described a culture of deliberate secrecy and a direct link between the illicit tapes and the coaching staff. The implications of Spygate are catastrophic for the historical record. It directly implicates the Patriots' first 3 Super Bowl victories, wins that cemented the legacy of Tom Brady and Bill Belichick as the greatest of all time. What if those championships were aided, in some small or significant part, by stolen information? Can those titles be viewed as purely legitimate? The league's decision to destroy the evidence was, in the words of former United States Senator Arlen Specter, who launched a congressional inquiry into the matter, a deliberate strategy by the NFL to contain the damage. Specter said, "They wanted it to go away, and for the most part, it did. The Patriots dynasty marched on, but now under a cloud of permanent suspicion." But the story does not end there. Spygate was merely the most visible eruption of a constant, subterranean fire. We will explore the allegations that followed of the Patriots and other teams manipulating the coach-to-quarterband radio system, of the suspicious deflation of footballs in the 2014 AFC Championship game. An event known as Deflategate that, while seemingly minor, exposed a mindset willing to manipulate every possible variable, no matter how trivial. We will investigate the modern, digital frontier of this war, the use of advanced analytics and data mining to find loopholes, the suspected hacking of opponent communication systems, and the ongoing high-tech cat-and-mouse game played in every stadium. This documentary is not an attempt to take away the athletic achievements of incredible players. Their sweat, pain, and talent are real. This is an investigation into the architecture within which they competed. It asks the uncomfortable question: was the field level? When we watch a legendary defensive play, a decisive interception in a Super Bowl, we must now wonder, did that defender know the route because of film study, or because of a stolen signal delivered to his helmet moments before the snap? The difference is the difference between genius and fraud. We are about to embark on a journey through 40 years of hidden history. We will meet the whistleblowers who risked their careers, the coaches whose triumphs are forever suspect, and the players on the losing end who have lived for decades with the gnawing belief that they were not just beaten, but cheated. This is a story about the fragility of truth in a world built on mythology. It is about the price of victory when the rules are treated as suggestions. And ultimately, it is about what we, as fans, choose to believe about the games we love. When the final whistle blows and the confetti falls, what, exactly, are we celebrating? The pursuit of excellence, or the mastery of deceit? The answer to that question will define not just the past of the National Football League, but its very soul. The genesis of any secret lies in its necessity. Before there were encrypted radio signals, before there were complex defensive audibles called with a tap on the helmet, there was the huddle. It was a simple, fundamental solution to a basic problem. In football's primordial, chaotic early days at the turn of the 20th century, plays were often called aloud at the line of scrimmage. The quarterback would simply shout a code word or number to his teammates. The defense, standing mere feet away, could hear everything. The game was transparent and consequently brutally simplistic. The introduction of the huddle around the 1920s, popularized by legendary University of Illinois coach Bob Zuppke, was the first great act of football encryption. It was a privacy curtain drawn around a conversation. It created a sacred, if temporary, space where a plan could be shared in secret. This was the birth of insider information. And with the creation of that private space came an immediate, irresistible temptation for those on the outside, the desire to breach it. The early codes were elementary, often just numbers corresponding to specific holes in the line. A 32 might mean a run through the number 3 hole by the number 2 back, but even this required protection. So began the practice of signaling. A coach or player on the sideline would relay the play to the quarterback on the field using a physical gesture. A touch of the hat, a wave of a hand, a specific posture. This was the dawn of the visible, yet cryptic, language of the sideline. It was also the opening of a second front in the information war. If you could not hear the play in the huddle, perhaps you could see it being sent in. The defensive sidelines soon had their own sets of eyes, not on the offensive formation, but on the opposing coach frantically waving his arms. The race to decode had begun in earnest, and it was a wholly analog affair, conducted with human eyes, human memory, and a primitive understanding of psychology. I found myself in Canton, Ohio, not at the gleaming Pro Football Hall of Fame, but in a quiet archival library, holding a fragile typewritten account from a player for the 1925 Pottsville Maroons. He described a game against the Chicago Cardinals where the Maroons coach, Dick Rauch, grew suspicious. His team's runs were being met with perfectly stacked defensive fronts. His passes seemed anticipated. Rauch was a former miner, a man accustomed to darkness and suspicion. He began watching the Cardinals' defensive captain, a man who seemed less focused on the Maroons' huddle and more on the Pottsville sideline. The account reads, Coach Rauch decided to test a theory. He called for a 23 bingo, a quick hitter off tackle. But instead of giving the real signal, he scratched his nose, then tugged his left ear. The Cardinals' captain immediately shifted 2 men to the strong side. They knew. They were reading the signals. The reaction was not one of official protest, but of gritty, pragmatic gamesmanship. The next series, Rauch assigned a backup, a player who wouldn't see the field, to stand in front of the signaling coach and perform a series of absurd, exaggerated gestures, scratching, jumping, waving his arms like a windmill, a deliberate act of visual sabotage. It was, in all likelihood, the first recorded use of a dummy signal caller. The theft was crude and the countermeasure was cruder, but the paradigm was set. The game on the field was now mirrored by a game of perception and deception off of it. This culture of gamesmanship festered and grew with the sport's popularity. The 1940s and 1950s, the era of leather helmets and two-way players, were rife with anecdotes that straddled the line between clever and corrupt. It was a time before a unified league office with real enforcement power. Ethics were local, determined by a team's ethos. Former New York Giants linebacker Sam Huff once told me a story from the late 1950s that illustrated the ambient skullduggery. "We played the Colts in Baltimore," he said, his voice still carrying a tone of grudging admiration. "Their place, Memorial Stadium, had those tiny visitors' locker rooms. And our playbooks, these big binders, would just be on a shelf. We come back at halftime and our playbook is on the floor. Nothing missing, but the pages are out of order. Someone had been through it fast. We couldn't prove a thing. Our coach, Jim Lee Howell, just said, 'Assume they know everything. Now go out and beat them anyway.' This was the accepted reality. Your secrets were never safe. The sanctity of your locker room, your sideline, your signals was an illusion. Preparation now had to include an element of counter-espionage. The technological evolution of the game accelerated the arms race. The first major leap was the introduction of sideline telephones in the 1950s, allowing coaches in the press box to communicate with the sideline. This immediately created a new vulnerability. Were the lines secure? It was widely suspected, though never proven in court, that some teams had arrangements with stadium switchboard operators or telephone company employees to listen in on the opposing coaches' conversations. It was a simple, deniable, and highly effective form of wiretapping. Then came the helmet radio for quarterbacks, pioneered by the Cleveland Browns in the 1950s but not fully adopted league-wide until much later. This was a revolution in play-calling speed and complexity, but it was also a signal broadcast through the air. The fear of interception was immediate. While the league eventually mandated encrypted, frequency-hopping systems, the early versions were widely believed to be susceptible to scanning. The very tools designed to create a strategic advantage also created monumental security risks. Perhaps the most telling figure of this embryonic era of the Shadow War was Paul Brown, the pioneering coach of the Cleveland Browns. Brown was a systematizer, a control freak of the highest order. He is credited with inventing the modern playbook, with scripting plays, with using film study as a teaching tool. He was also, by many accounts, a master of psychological and informational warfare. He employed former military intelligence officers as scouts. He was known to have the visitors' locker room at Cleveland's old municipal stadium bugged, a claim that has persisted for decades and has been attested to by several opposing players from that era. Brown understood that information was the ultimate weapon, and he sought to monopolize it. His ethos trickled down through the league. If a man as respected and successful as Paul Brown was engaging in such tactics, then they were not beyond the pale. They were simply part of the cost of doing business at the highest level. By the dawn of the 1960s, as the NFL began its ascent to national prominence, the foundation was fully laid. The core principles of the Shadow War were already established. Every piece of information is valuable. Every channel of communication is vulnerable. And the only true sin is getting caught. The methods were still physical, lip-reading, binoculars, stolen playbooks, suspected wiretaps. The culture of whatever it takes had taken root, nurtured by a league with minimal oversight and a win-at-all-costs mentality. The stage was now set for the first true dynasty to be built not just on talent, but on a sophisticated, regimented system of signal theft. The analog age of suspicion was about to give way to a more clinical, purposeful era of decoding. The whispers of theft were growing into a coherent, executable strategy. The hidden hand was learning how to write its own playbook. If the early decades of the NFL established the Shadow War's basic rules of engagement, it was in the smog-choked, steel-forged crucible of 1970s Pittsburgh where those tactics were first refined into a precise and devastating science. The Pittsburgh Steelers of that era are rightly remembered for their ferocious, iconic defense. The Steel Curtain, a front four that seemed carved from the very mills that loomed over the city. L.C. Greenwood, Joe Green, Dwight White, Ernie Holmes. Their names alone evoked physical domination. But to attribute their success solely to brute force is to miss the true genius and the darker secret of their operation. For while the front four supplied the terror, the backbone of that defense, its cognitive cortex, was a secondary that didn't just react to plays. They often knew them before the ball was snapped. Their dominance was as much intellectual as it was physical. They were the first defense to institutionalize signal theft, transforming it from a sideline gambit into a core weekly practice. Under the obsessive guidance of defensive coordinator Bud Carson, the Steelers didn't just watch film. They conducted forensic audits of their opponent's communication. Bud Carson was a meticulous, cerebral architect. He viewed football not as a series of isolated collisions, but as a pattern of coded information. His innovation was to systematize the chaos of the sideline. He assigned specific players on the Steelers' defense not just to cover receivers, but to cover opposing coaches. While the offense huddled, the eyes of Pittsburgh's safeties and linebackers would drift from the formation to the sideline, scanning the frantic dance of the opposing coaches. One player would be responsible for the head coach's gestures. Another would watch the offensive coordinator. A third might focus on the quarterback coach or a specific player relaying signals. They were human surveillance cameras, and their footage was processed in real time against a week's worth of intelligence. Mel Blount, the Steelers' Hall of Fame cornerback, was explicit about this in later years. It wasn't guesswork, Blount said. It was study. We broke down film of their signals from the end zone angle for hours. We knew that when the receiver's coach tugged his hat twice and pointed left, it was usually a slant route to that side. When the offensive coordinator crossed his arms and then clapped, it was a draw play. We had a sheet on the sideline with the signals we'd confirmed. Our job was to see it, call it out, and kill the play. The process was methodical. The Steelers' video department, far more advanced than most of the league at the time, would splice together every offensive play from an opponent's previous games, but with a crucial twist. They included the 10 seconds before the snap, focusing on the sideline. Carson and his players would sit in dark rooms, watching these silent films, looking for the tell. They correlated gestures with play types, with down and distance, with personnel groupings. They were building a Rosetta Stone for each opponent's visual language. Safety Mike Wagner described it as learning a second playbook. Theirs. This was not a sporadic effort. It was a fundamental part of their weekly preparation, as regimented as practicing tackling drills. The knowledge gained was then disseminated with military precision. In the defensive huddle, players would share what they saw. They're in zebra personnel, and the coordinator just wiped his hand over his head. That's the deep post to the tight end. I've got it. The confidence this bred was palpable. It allowed linebackers Jack Lambert and Jack Ham to play with a preternatural anticipation, flowing to the point of attack before the blocking scheme could even develop. The impact on the field was both subtle and profound. It did not mean they intercepted every pass or stuffed every run. Its power was in the accumulation of advantages, in the deflation of the opposing offense. Quarterbacks facing the Steelers began to experience a unique form of psychological torment. They would come to the line, see a defense perfectly aligned to stop the play they had just called, and be forced to burn a timeout or audible into a less optimal call. The rhythm of an offense is a fragile thing, built on timing and surprise. The Steelers systematically dismantled both. Ken Anderson, the precise and intelligent quarterback of the rival Cincinnati Bengals, spoke of the frustration. You'd call a play, break the huddle, and see their linebackers already shifting, their safeties cheating. It was demoralizing. You start questioning your own signals, your own playbook. You'd look over at their sideline, and Bud Carson would just be standing there, arms folded, like he knew what was in your head. This psychic erosion was as valuable as any sack or turnover. The crowning evidence of this systemic approach came not in a regular season game, but under the brightest lights imaginable. Super Bowl X against the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys, under Tom Landry, were the epitome of automated, complex offense. They were the computerized team, reliant on precise execution of a vast playbook. The Steelers treated them as the ultimate decryption challenge. In the days leading up to the game, the Steelers' defensive staff, according to multiple later accounts from players, became convinced they had cracked a significant portion of the Cowboys' sideline signaling, particularly for their passing plays. The game itself became a showcase for this intelligence. While the iconic moment was Lynn Swann's acrobatic catch, the defining undercurrent was the Steelers' defense baffling Cowboys quarterback Roger Staubach. In the fourth quarter, with Dallas driving, Steelers safety Glenn Edwards intercepted a Staubach pass in the end zone to seal the victory. After the game, Edwards was asked about the play. He said, "We knew what was coming. We saw the signal from the sideline. It was a 7 route, a corner route. I just got a good jump on it." He said it matter-of-factly, as if it were normal procedure. For the Steelers, it was. The league took note. What Pittsburgh was doing was not explicitly illegal. There was no rule against studying an opponent's signals. It was considered gamesmanship. But the scale and sophistication of their operation represented a qualitative shift. It moved signal theft from the realm of opportunistic spying into the realm of dedicated, strategic preparation. It forced a response. Opponents began using more complex signal systems, employing multiple dummy signalers, and using wristbands with play codes for quarterbacks. An innovation born largely out of necessity to counter the Steelers' prying eyes. The Steelers, in essence, had weaponized information to a degree that changed how offenses had to operate league-wide. They proved that a defense could be proactive rather than reactive, that it could dictate terms not by sheer force alone, but by superior knowledge. Yet, this success planted a dangerous seed, created a blueprint. It demonstrated unequivocally that decoding an opponent's signals was not a marginal trick, but a championship-level competitive advantage. The message reverberated through the league. If you are not doing this, you are at a disadvantage. The ethical line, once fuzzy, was now being trampled by the cleats of a dynasty. The Steelers' greatness is unimpeachable. Their talent was historic. But intertwined with that greatness was a practiced, institutionalized art of interception that went beyond the football. They perfected the craft of seeing the unseen, of hearing the silent command. They turned the sideline into a transparent window, and they built their fortress of championships with the bricks of stolen secrets. In doing so, they set a new standard for what it took to win, a standard that would not only be emulated but would escalate in the decades to come. The Shadow War now had its first great general in Bud Carson, and its most decorated battalion in the Steel Curtain. The race was on, and the finish line was forever stained by the methods used to reach it. The rise of the West Coast offense under Bill Walsh in the 1980s did not merely represent a strategic evolution in professional football. It represented a fundamental philosophical shift that would inadvertently ignite the next, more desperate phase of the Shadow War. Prior to Walsh, offensive football was often a test of power and simplicity. Dominant running games, deep vertical passes. The cognitive load was significant, but the variables were fewer. What Walsh engineered with the San Francisco 49ers was a system of exquisite, almost neurotic complexity. It was a symphony of precisely timed, option-based passing routes where a single play could have 7 different outcomes based on a quarterback's post-snap read. The quarterback was no longer a mere executor. He was a field general conducting a real-time algorithm. This offensive intelligence, however, created a defensive crisis. How do you defend against a system designed to be indefensible through conventional reaction? The answer for many opponents was to stop trying to react. They had to know. The pressure to gain pre-snap intelligence, to breach Walsh's brilliant code, became an obsessive and often ethically compromised pursuit. The paranoia of genius bred a new desperation in its adversaries. Bill Walsh was, himself, a man deeply acquainted with paranoia. His notebooks were filled not just with plays, but with intricate security protocols. He understood that the value of his system was its secrecy and its surprise. He famously used a call sheet with hundreds of plays, each with a numeric code, relayed to the quarterback via a wristband. This was a direct counter to the kind of sideline signal theft the Steelers had perfected. If you couldn't see the play call on the sideline, you had to find another way. Walsh also employed a system of dummy signals, complex shifts and motions designed not just to gain a tactical advantage, but to create visual noise, to overload the defensive surveillance effort. He assumed his signals were being watched. He operated in what former 49ers safety Ronnie Lott described to me as a constant state of elegant suspicion. Walsh's own defensive coordinator, George Seifert, would later say, "Bill didn't just coach the offense. He coached the entire theater of deception. He knew that a fraction of a second of defensive hesitation, born from confusion, was the difference between a completion and an incompletion. This defensive hesitation was unacceptable to the men tasked with stopping the 49ers. Coaches facing Walsh began to feel they were playing chess against a supercomputer. The traditional methods of film study, tracking tendencies based on formation and down, were rendered less effective by the multiplicity of options within each play. The only apparent way to level the field was to gain access to the code itself. This led to a marked escalation in espionage tactics aimed squarely at San Francisco. Former 49ers quarterback Steve Young recalled the palpable sense of being hunted for information. "You'd go into certain stadiums, and it was just an understanding," Young said. "The visitor's phone line would be staticky or go dead at a crucial moment. Your headset would pick up chatter. It was psychological, but it was also real. We had plays stolen. I remember a game against the Giants. I audibled at the line to a quick slant, and before I even finished the cadence, their linebacker, Pepper Johnson, was screaming slant, slant, and jumped the route perfectly. That's not film study. That's someone who knew the audible call." The most significant and documented escalation occurred in the NFC Championship game following the 1984 season, as the 49ers prepared to face the Chicago Bears and their historically great defense. A week before the game, a 49ers security official allegedly found a man, later claimed to be a private investigator with ties to the Bears organization, hiding in the trees overlooking the team's secluded practice field in Redwood City, California. He was equipped with a long-lens camera and a listening device. The 49ers immediately closed practice and filed a formal complaint with the league office. The The Bears denied any official involvement. The league's investigation was, by all accounts, perfunctory. No meaningful punishment was levied. But the message was chilling. The shadow war was no longer confined to the sidelines during games. It had expanded to include covert surveillance of private practices, a direct attempt to steal the intellectual property of the playbook itself. Walsh was furious and deeply affected. He saw it not as a rogue act, but as a logical extension of the win-at-all-costs mentality his own success had provoked. It validated his deepest suspicions. This incident, and the general aura of espionage surrounding the 49ers dynasty, forced a technological and strategic arms race. Defensive coaches, unable to match Walsh's offensive ingenuity directly, invested heavily in their own intelligence apparatus. The role of the get-back coach, the staff member responsible for ensuring no opposing spy could see the play sheet, became more critical. Teams began using multiple signal callers with elaborate misdirection. Radio technology in quarterbacks' helmets, once a novelty, became a coveted security tool, though its vulnerability to interception was an open secret. The cat-and-mouse game reached a point of absurd complexity. Former New York Giants coach Bill Parcells, a frequent Walsh adversary, summed up the era's paranoid ethos. "You spent as much time devising ways to protect your signals as you did devising the plays themselves," Parcells said. "You'd have a guy signaling in a play, and standing next to him would be a guy doing a completely different set of gestures just to confuse anyone watching. It was like a bad spy movie. But if you didn't do it, you felt naked." The legacy of the Walsh catalyst is therefore twofold. On one hand, he gifted football an offensive revolution of beauty and intellect. On the other, his very genius corrupted the competitive landscape. He proved that strategic information was the ultimate weapon, and in doing so, he incentivized its theft at any cost. The methods pioneered against the Steelers, studying sideline film, were now insufficient. Opponents needed more. They needed the plays before the signals were sent, the audibles before they were called, the game plan before it was executed. The 1980s saw the shadow war metastasize from a tactical sideline ploy into a holistic, full-spectrum effort to compromise an opponent's entire strategic process. The Bears' spy in the trees was not an anomaly. It was a harbinger. It revealed a stark truth. In the quest to defeat a system built on perfect information, there were no longer any boundaries. The field was no longer level. It was a minefield of deception, and every team was now forced to become both an army and a secret police. The elegance of Walsh's offense had inadvertently given birth to a far uglier, more relentless form of warfare, setting a dangerous precedent that would define the desperation of the decades to follow. The Buffalo Bills of the early 1990s presented a problem for which the NFL's defensive ecosystem had no precedent and, initially, no answer. Their offense, dubbed the K-Gun, was a marvel of streamlined aggression. Orchestrated by the cerebral Jim Kelly, it was a no-huddle, hurry-up attack that operated with the ruthless efficiency of an assembly line. The philosophical shift was seismic. By eliminating the huddle, the Bills eliminated the offense's most vulnerable moment of communication. There were no gathered players to lip-read, no prolonged signal from the sideline to decrypt. The play call came directly from Kelly at the line of scrimmage, often relayed via a wristband code, in a matter of seconds. This was Bill Walsh's complexity weaponized with blistering pace. It turned the informational chess match into a frantic game of speed chess. Defenses were stripped of their ability to substitute personnel, to communicate complex adjustments, to consult their own stolen signal sheets. They were left exposed, reactive, and intellectually disarmed. The Bills' blueprint for success was simple: render the opponent's intelligence apparatus obsolete through sheer velocity. The response it provoked, however, would drag the shadow war into a new realm of technological desperation and blatant gamesmanship. The immediate on-field reaction was one of visible panic. Defenses, gasping for air and cohesion, resorted to the only tactic that could legally stop the clock: the fake injury. It became a league-wide epidemic. A linebacker would suddenly crumple to the turf without contact, clutching his knee or hamstring, halting the Bills' momentum and allowing his gassed unit a precious respite. Bills coach Marv Levy, a man of professorial demeanor, seethed with a quiet fury at what he saw as a corruption of the game's integrity. It was transparent and it was cowardly, Levy said years later. We were not just playing against our opponents. We were playing against a tactic that made a mockery of the rules. They were not stealing our signals. They were stealing our tempo, which was our signal. The league, caught off guard, issued vague warnings about sportsmanship, but took no substantive action. The message was clear. When faced with an innovative strategic advantage, the old guard would resort to any loophole, any gray area to survive. But the fake injury was a crude, temporary fix. The deeper, more systemic response was a redirected focus of espionage. If you couldn't decode the sideline signal because there wasn't one, you had to intercept the communication at its new source, the quarterback at the line. This required a different kind of theft. Teams began investing heavily in advanced lip-reading experts, studying extreme close-ups of Kelly's face as he barked calls. They wired their defensive play callers with more sophisticated radio systems to speed communication, which in turn raised fears of those frequencies being scanned. The press box became a hotter war zone. Spotters now used high-powered binoculars not just to see signals, but to try to read the code numbers on Kelly's wristband. The Bills, aware of this, employed elaborate shielding on the sideline, coaches holding large clipboards or towels over Kelly's wrist as he conferred with them. The sideline had become a stage for a silent, frantic pantomime of security. The war reached its most controversial peak in the 1990 AFC Championship game against the Los Angeles Raiders. The Bills' offense operated with its typical, devastating efficiency. After the game, a seething Raiders coach, Art Shell, made a stunning accusation. He claimed the Bills had been illegally jamming the radio frequency used by the Raiders' defensive coaches to communicate with the field. Our headsets were full of static the entire first half, Shell stated publicly. It was not a coincidence. When we changed frequencies at halftime, suddenly the problem cleared up. They knew what we were doing. The NFL investigated. Their finding was a masterpiece of bureaucratic ambiguity. There was no definitive evidence of intentional jamming, but they acknowledged unusual interference in the Raiders system. No punishment was issued. For the Bills and the league, it was a case closed. For the Raiders and many observers, it was a confirmation. The shadow war had escalated from stealing signals to actively sabotaging an opponent's command and control. The battlefield was now the electromagnetic spectrum. This incident served as a flashing red light for the entire league. If the Raiders' accusation was true, it meant a team had crossed a profound line, moving from passive espionage to active electronic warfare. It created an atmosphere of toxic suspicion. When a headset failed in a crucial moment, the first thought was no longer equipment malfunction. It was sabotage. This paranoia fed directly into the next great scandal, which would erupt just a few years later involving the New England Patriots and their own mysterious frequency issues. But the seed was planted in Buffalo. The Bills' no-huddle offense, by its very design, had made traditional spying obsolete and in doing so, incentivized more aggressive, technological, and deniable methods of interception. The Bills' legacy in this hidden history is therefore paradoxical. They were victims of cynical, rule-bending tactics like fake injuries, and they were targets of potentially illegal electronic interference. Yet, their success also forced a corrupt adaptation from their opponents, an adaptation that normalized more extreme measures. They proved that an offense could be built to be spy-proof, but in doing so, they provoked a wave of espionage that sought to bypass the field entirely and hack the system itself. Hall of Fame defensive end Bruce Smith, the cornerstone of the Bills' defense, saw it from both sides. We knew teams were trying everything to get our calls, Smith reflected. But what I saw from our offense, the way it made other teams act, it was desperate. They weren't just trying to beat us. They were trying to invent new ways to cheat the game because they couldn't beat the game we were playing. The Bills' 4 consecutive Super Bowl appearances stand as a monument to offensive innovation and resilience. But the path they carved was littered with the debris of broken norms. They forced the league into a technological arms race it was ill-equipped to monitor or police. The fake injuries, the alleged frequency jamming, the intensified lip-reading and surveillance, all of it was a testament to the terrifying efficiency of their system. The K-gun offense did not just score points. It exposed the fragility of competitive integrity in the face of an overwhelming strategic advantage. It demonstrated that when a team becomes too good, too fast, and too smart through legitimate innovation, the opposition's recourse will often drift into the illegitimate. The blueprint for beating the Bills was never fully drawn on a chalkboard. It was sketched in the shadows, using methods the league would rather not acknowledge, setting a dangerous new standard for how far teams were willing to go to silence an offense they could not otherwise solve. To understand the full, formalized machinery of the Shadow War, you must first reimagine the NFL sideline. It is not a random collection of players and coaches. It is a meticulously organized intelligence operation. Every person has a designated station, a specific sightline, a pre-assigned task. The chaos is a carefully constructed illusion. And within this organized chaos, one figure emerged whose very title betrayed the paranoia of the age: the get-back coach. Officially, his job was utilitarian, to ensure players and coaches did not stray onto the field of play, incurring a penalty. But in practice, his role was far more nuanced and sinister. He was a sentinel, a guardian of secrets, and often a chief spy. His presence on every sideline, starting in the late 1980s and becoming ubiquitous in the 1990s, signaled the final, complete institutionalization of signal theft. Espionage was no longer a side project for a curious linebacker. It was a budgeted, staffed, and integral part of game day operations. The get-back coach operated in a critical space, the no-man's land between the bench and the white sideline marker. From this vantage point, he had a panoramic view. He could see his own team's signaling process, and with a slight turn of the head, he could observe the opposing sideline. His primary defensive function was to act as a human shield. He would stand, often with a large clipboard or play sheet held conspicuously aloft, physically blocking the sight lines of any suspected opponent spotters in the stands or on the field. He would orchestrate a curtain of players and equipment managers to surround the quarterback during sideline conferences. He was the guardian of the code. But his offensive function was equally vital. With his eyes supposedly on his own team, he was perfectly positioned to engage in passive surveillance. He could monitor the opposing team's signal callers, note their gestures, and watch for patterns in their personnel substitutions. He was the ideal agent in place. I spoke with a former get-back coach for a prominent NFC team in the 1990s, who spoke on condition of anonymity due to ongoing ties to the league. It was absolutely a two-way street, he told me. My official job was to keep our guys back and protect our signals. My unofficial job was to watch everything. I had a headset connected to our coaching booth. If I saw something, if I noticed that when the opponent's offensive line coach touched his hat and then his hip, they ran a toss play, I'd key the mic and say, "Hat hip is toss, I've seen it 3 times. Up in the booth, they'd note it. By the second half, we might have 8 or 10 of their signals confirmed. I wasn't a coach drawing up plays. I was a field intelligence officer. This systematic approach required coordination. Teams began dedicating a coach or assistant in the press box solely to the task of monitoring the opponent's sideline with high-powered video cameras and binoculars. This person, often called the eye in the sky, or the spotter, would communicate directly with the get-back coach or the defensive coordinator. They were building a real-time database. The process was no longer about a player's memory from a week of film study. It was about a coordinated, live-streaming decryption effort. Former New York Giants head coach Jim Fassel admitted to the scope of this operation. "We all had a guy," Fassel said. "Every single team. His whole job during the game was to watch their sidelines and try to pick up anything. He'd have a sheet of signals we suspected from film work, and he'd be up there trying to confirm them live. It was considered standard procedure. If you weren't doing it, you were negligent." The technology evolved to serve this formalized system. Teams started using multiple-channel radio systems for coaches. The defensive coordinator might be on one frequency, the get-back coach on another, the spotter in the booth on a third. This created a secure, closed-loop network for stolen intelligence. But it also increased vulnerability. The fear of having these frequencies scanned or jammed, as the Raiders had accused the Bills of doing, became a paramount security concern. Teams employed former military communications specialists to run their equipment and ensure secure channels. The sideline became a scene from a Cold War spy film, with technicians huddled over black boxes, scanning for interference, while coaches spoke in coded language over their headsets. Perhaps the most telling example of this institutionalized surveillance came from the Minnesota Vikings under head coach Dennis Green in the late 1990s. Green, a meticulous organizer, created one of the most sophisticated signal intelligence operations in the league. He had a former college psychology professor on staff whose sole role was to analyze opponent behavior for tells. The Vikings video department produced custom tapes for each game, one for players focusing on opponent tendencies, and a separate, highly classified tape for coaches that compiled every detected sideline signal from their upcoming opponent, organized by down, distance, and personnel group. Former Vikings offensive coordinator Bill Belichick recalled, "We knew we were a target, so we built a fortress. But we also had the best intelligence gathering operation I've ever seen." Dennis believed information was the currency of victory. "We spent as much on video equipment and radio gear as some teams spent on scouting." The legacy of the get-back coach and the formalized spy booth is a profound one. It marks the moment when the shadow war was fully absorbed into the bureaucracy of the NFL. It was no longer cheating. It was a competitive advantage. It was no longer a rogue act. It was a staff position. The league office, by its silence and lack of regulation, tacitly endorsed this arms race. There was no rule against watching an opponent's sideline. There was only a rule against using certain technology to do it. This created a perverse incentive. Do it, but do it in a way that is plausibly deniable, using human eyes instead of camera lenses. The entire culture became one of sanctioned deceit. This formalized, sideline-based system created the perfect ecosystem for the next logical leap. If human eyes could be so effective, what if they were augmented? What if you could film the opposing sideline, not for a vague weekly highlight reel, but for the specific, actionable purpose of decoding signals? And what if you could do it from a location that gave you a perfect, unobstructed view? The infrastructure was in place. The spotter in the booth, the get-back coach on the field, the communication network. All that was missing was a more efficient method of collection. The stage was now set for a team to cross the final technological threshold, to replace the fallible human eye with the perfect, recording eye of the camera. The institutionalization of surveillance had built the highway. It was only a matter of time before someone decided to drive a truck through the last remaining guardrail. The accusation strikes at the very heart of football's culture, the sanctity of the playbook. In a league where coaching trees are meticulously documented and intellectual lineage is a badge of honor, the line between inspiration and theft is both razor-thin and fiercely defended. No case study in the Shadow War embodies this conflict more acutely than the persistent, lingering allegations surrounding the Denver Broncos of the late 1990s and their head coach, Mike Shanahan. The Broncos' offense, a devastating precision-cut run game that powered the team to consecutive Super Bowl titles in 1997 and 1998, was hailed as a modern masterpiece. But to a vocal group of competitors and observers, it was not a masterpiece born purely of innovation. It was, they alleged, a masterpiece of intellectual property theft, a system allegedly lifted piece by piece from the most guarded vaults of their rivals. The story of the Denver equation is not one of stolen signals in a game, but of a potentially stolen soul, an entire offensive philosophy allegedly appropriated, repurposed, and weaponized against its creators. The roots of the controversy lie in the interconnected web of the NFL's coaching fraternity. Mike Shanahan was a proud branch on the Bill Walsh coaching tree. He had served as the offensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers in 1992, a season that culminated in a Super Bowl victory. During that time, he was granted intimate, comprehensive access to the full canon of the West Coast offense. This was a sacred trust. When Shanahan departed to become head coach of the Denver Broncos in 1995, he took that knowledge with him, as is customary. The expectation, however vague and gentlemanly, was that he would build upon it, adapt it, make it his own. The allegation, first whispered and then shouted, was that Shanahan did not just take the principles. He allegedly took the proprietary specific verbatim playbook of a divisional rival, incorporating it wholesale into his own system to gain a decisive and unfair strategic advantage. The rival was the San Diego Chargers, and the source of the alleged theft was not a spy in the trees, but a man on the payroll. The Chargers' offensive coordinator from 1992 to 1996 was a bright, run-game specialist named Gary Stevens. In 1997, Stevens was hired by Shanahan to be the Broncos' offensive coordinator. The move itself was unremarkable. Coaches change teams every year, but the timing and the impact were explosive. The Chargers, under head coach Bobby Ross and then Kevin Gilbride, had developed a powerful, specific rushing attack known for its sophisticated zone-blocking schemes and complex puller assignments. It was a system Stevens had helped design and knew intimately. Within a season of Stevens' arrival in Denver, the Broncos' running game, led by the seemingly unstoppable Terrell Davis, transformed into a juggernaut that bore a striking, some would say identical, resemblance to the Chargers' best schemes. Former Chargers personnel were stunned. Defensive players who had practiced against their own offense for years faced it again in Broncos orange, executed with even greater precision. Offensive linemen recognized their own techniques, their own calls, their own adjustments. The allegations became public in the heat of competition. After a 1997 matchup, veteran Chargers linebacker Junior So, a student of the game, stated bluntly to reporters, "That's our offense. I know that offense. I practiced against it for 5 years. They're running our plays." His teammate, defensive end William Fuller, echoed the sentiment. It's one thing to have a similar system. It's another to see the exact same plays, the same line calls, the same backfield action. Gary Stevens didn't just take the playbook. He brought the answers to the test. The most damning confrontation occurred not on the field, but on the sideline during the 1994 AFC Championship game, when Shanahan was still the 49ers coordinator. Chargers coach Bobby Ross had become convinced the 49ers had stolen his team's defensive signals. A furious, finger-pointing argument erupted between Ross and Shanahan on the sideline, captured by national television cameras. Ross accused Shanahan of being a little thief. The visceral anger in that moment spoke to a deeper, more personal grievance that predated the Stevens hiring. It suggested a reputation for appropriation was already taking hold. Shanahan and the Broncos vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Their defense was one of common lineage and independent development. Shanahan argued that the zone-blocking scheme was not invented by the Chargers. It was a concept with roots in earlier football, one he and offensive line coach Alex Gibbs had refined in Denver. He pointed to Terrell Davis's vision and talent, and to the superior execution of his own players. Gary Stevens maintained he brought his knowledge and expertise, not a physical playbook. The league, presented with no tangible evidence like a film tape or a stolen document, had no grounds for intervention. It was a he said, they said dispute mired in the unpatentable ideas of a violent sport. Yet, the statistical and tactical coincidences are haunting. The Chargers led the NFL in rushing in 1996. In 1997, with Gary Stevens now in Denver, the Chargers' rushing attack plummeted to 26th in the league, while the Broncos skyrocketed to 4th, then 1st in their Super Bowl year of 1998. The specific plays that gashed opponents, the counter tray, the specific zone runs with a fullback leading through a precise hole, were carbon copies of San Diego's previous success. Former Broncos players have offered conflicting accounts. Some, like fullback Howard Griffith, have said the system was unique to Denver. Others, speaking off the record, acknowledged the resemblance was too precise to be coincidence, suggesting a level of intellectual transfer that crossed an ethical line. The legacy of the Denver equation is a corrosive one. It exposed a different, more profound layer of the shadow war, the theft of systemic identity. It was no longer about knowing if a slant route was coming on third down. It was about knowing the entire philosophical and tactical blueprint of your opponent because you had hired its architect and allegedly taken its original plans. It rendered the Chargers' own strategic advantage obsolete, as the rival now possessed the same weapon. It was corporate espionage applied to football. If true, it meant a championship could be built not just on drafting and coaching, but on the calculated acquisition of a rival's core intellectual property. This episode cemented a lasting paranoia around coaching hires. Teams became fiercely protective of their assistants, writing stringent non-compete clauses into contracts, though their enforceability was dubious. Playbooks were locked away with greater security. The friendly exchange of ideas within the coaching fraternity was replaced by a colder, more suspicious atmosphere. The Broncos' success, glittering with Lombardi trophies, stands as a monument to execution and talent. But for those on the other side, it remains a monument to a different kind of victory, one achieved not by building a better system, but by allegedly taking someone else's and making it run with a better engine. The Shadow War had now proven it could consume not just a Sunday's signals, but an entire franchise's strategic mind. And if a team could steal an offense, what was to stop another from trying to steal the very means of communication itself? In the Shadow War, few figures loomed larger or cast a more suspicious eye than Bill Parcells. The Tuna was a warlord of the old school, a believer in toughness, will, and the concrete advantage. He operated with a cold, calculating pragmatism that assumed the worst of his opponents. So when his instincts screamed betrayal, the entire league took notice. The events surrounding the 1998 AFC Championship game between Parcells' New York Jets and the Denver Broncos represent the most notorious, yet unresolved, allegation of high-tech espionage in NFL history. It is a chapter defined not by conclusive evidence, but by the furious conviction of a legendary coach, the peculiar findings of a league investigation, and a lingering stench of deceit that forever hangs over one of the Broncos' championship crowns. This was the moment the Shadow War was alleged to have gone fully electronic, moving from stolen glances to a suspected black box capable of intercepting the very thoughts of a defense. The setting was Mile High Stadium, January 17, 1999. The Jets, a surprising contender engineered by Parcells, possessed a formidable, complex defense coordinated by Bill Belichick. Their system relied on a dense web of pre-snap disguises and last-second adjustments, communicated via radio headset from Belichick on the sideline to linebacker Mo Lewis on the field. From the game's opening drive, Parcells and his staff sensed something was profoundly wrong. Their defensive signals, they believed, were being anticipated with an almost clairvoyant precision. Broncos quarterback John Elway, a master tactician himself, seemed to operate with a preternatural calm, identifying and attacking the Jets' defensive schemes the moment they were set. Parcells later described the feeling as one of visceral violation. "It was like they were in our huddle," he said. "Not just one play, pattern. They checked to perfect plays against our pressures. It was systematic." The specific focus of Parcells' wrath centered on the coach-to-player radio system. The Jets claimed their defensive headsets were flooded with unusual, persistent static for the entire first half, specifically only when their defense was on the field. This was not the typical crowd noise interference. It was a targeted barrage of electronic noise that ceased the moment the Jets' offense took possession. At halftime, furious Jets officials switched to a backup frequency. The static, they reported, miraculously cleared. This sequence formed the core of their accusation. The Broncos, they believed, had employed a device, a black box or jammer, to disrupt the Jets' defensive communications, forcing them into silent, improvised hand signals that were far easier for Denver's sideline spies to decipher and relay to Elway. Parcells did not mince words in the aftermath. While stopping short of a formal legal accusation, he made his belief devastatingly clear to the media. "Let's just say there were a lot of coincidences out there," he stated, his voice dripping with contempt. "We had some serious communication problems that were very one-sided. When you have that happen in a game of this magnitude, it makes you wonder." His quarterback, Vinny Testaverde, was more direct in private conversations with teammates, echoing the sentiment that the Broncos' offense played with an unnatural degree of certainty against a top-tier defense. The NFL, facing a public relations crisis on the eve of the Super Bowl, launched an investigation. The findings, released in a terse statement, were a masterpiece of bureaucratic ambiguity. The league confirmed that the Jets' headsets had experienced interference in the first half. It also confirmed that the Broncos' equipment staff had, in fact, been using a video director device on the sideline, a powerful wireless unit used for coordinating film feeds. This device, the league stated, was not prohibited, but was found to be operating on a frequency that could cause interference. Crucially, the NFL said there was no evidence the interference was intentional. The Broncos were fined $25,000 for failing to notify the league about the device, a slap on the wrist that felt more like a parking ticket than a punishment for potentially corrupting a conference championship. For Parcells and the Jets, the league's response was a bitter insult. A fine for an oversight did nothing to address the core question. Had their communications been sabotaged? The use of the phrase "could cause interference" was a legalistic dodge. It admitted capability, not intent. In the court of football opinion, particularly within the Parcells-Belichick coaching tree, the verdict was grimly settled. Belichick himself, though publicly circumspect, carried the lesson forward. It reinforced his deepest-held belief. The NFL was a lawless frontier where rules were for the naive, and the league office was an ineffective referee. You had to protect yourself by any means necessary. The legacy of the black box game is profound in its murkiness. It stands as the NFL's original sin of electronic suspicion. It provided a tangible, albeit unproven, blueprint for how a team could gain a decisive illegal advantage, not by studying signals, but by destroying an opponent's ability to make them. It transformed every future case of headset static from a technical glitch into a potential act of war. The incident did more than just mar a Broncos championship. It poisoned the well of trust for a generation of coaches. It signaled that the Shadow War's next frontier would be the electromagnetic spectrum, a realm with no visible proof, only the chilling sensation of a voice disappearing into the void and an opponent who seemed to know exactly why. For Bill Parcells, it was a confirming tragedy. It validated his innate paranoia and his view of the league as a jungle. For the Denver Broncos, it remains a footnote they dismiss as sour grapes from a defeated rival. But in the intricate chronology of the Shadow War, the 1998 AFC Championship is a flashing red alarm that everyone heard, and no one in authority truly answered. It created a vacuum of accountability, a shadowy space where the next, even more brazen operation would take root. That operation would not rely on mysterious interference. It would be one of pure, aggressive collection, using the camera as its weapon. And the man who had been on the wrong end of the black box allegation, Bill Belichick, would soon be the central figure accused of perfecting the dark art his mentor so fiercely decried. The student was about to become the master, and the Shadow War was poised for its defining scandal. To understand the system that would eventually dominate and define the modern NFL, you must first visit the barren landscape from which it sprang. Foxborough, Massachusetts, in the mid-1990s was a football purgatory. The New England Patriots were less a franchise than a recurring joke, a chaotic ensemble of underperformance and instability, playing in a dilapidated stadium known more for its obstructed views and drunken brawls than for any glory on the field. Their identity was a void. This void, this absence of tradition and expectation, would become the perfect petri dish for a new kind of football organism. The roots of the Patriot dynasty were not planted in fertile ground, but in hard, unforgiving clay. And the men who began to till that soil were not visionary builders, but survivors and pragmatists who imported a single, overriding principle from their previous wars. Information is the only true currency. In the 5 years preceding their first championship, the Patriots did not build a team. They built an intelligence agency with a football team as its cover operation. The process began, ironically, with the man who would become their most bitter rival, Bill Parcells. Hired in 1993 to resurrect the franchise, Parcells brought his trademark authoritarian culture and, more importantly, his relentless paranoid eye for detail. He also brought a young, fiercely intelligent defensive coordinator named Bill Belichick. The Parcells-Belichick symbiosis was foundational. From Parcells, Belichick absorbed the macro lesson of total organizational control, the insistence that every facet, from the quality of the hotel mattresses on road trips to the content of the press releases, could impact winning and losing. But from his own obsessive nature, Belichick was already evolving a micro-philosophy that surpassed his mentors. Where Parcells sought to control the environment, Belichick sought to understand the universe of the game itself. He was a football cosmologist, believing that every piece of data, no matter how trivial, held latent value. This period with the Patriots, ending in a Super Bowl 31 loss to Green Bay, was Belichick's postgraduate work. He saw how a culture was built, and he saw how it fractured when Parcells' feud with owner Robert Kraft erupted into a very public divorce. The lesson was clear. To execute a vision without compromise, one needed absolute sovereignty. The interregnum under coach Pete Carroll from 1997 to 1999 is often mischaracterized as a peaceful, lax contrast to the Parcells frost. In reality, it was during these years that the methodological infrastructure for the future was quietly assembled. Carroll, an optimist by nature, gave his assistants immense autonomy. Belichick was gone, but his disciples remained. Scott Pioli, a rising personnel man, and Ernie Adams, Belichick's mysterious, longtime football research guru, were embedded in the organization. Adams, in particular, is the spectral figure haunting this prelude. A reclusive genius with a mind for cross-referencing seemingly unrelated data points, he operated from a secluded office, his work unknown even to most of the coaching staff. Under Carroll, Adams continued his life's work, building databases of play tendencies, down and distance probabilities, and yes, studying the film of opposing sidelines. His presence created a continuum of clandestine research that survived the transition between coaching regimes. The football operations, under Vice President of Player Personnel Bobby Greer, began investing in advanced video and computer technology far beyond the league norm. They weren't just preparing for the next game. They were archiving the entire league. The true catalyst, however, was the return of the prodigal son in 2000. When Robert Kraft hired Bill Belichick as head coach, it was not a hire. It was the activation of a sleeper cell. Belichick arrived with a fully formed doctrine, sharpened during his year as defensive coordinator of the New York Jets under Parcells, where the black box allegations had cemented his worldview. His philosophy, articulated in those early staff meetings, was radical in its cold simplicity. Eliminate all variables outside of execution. Do not let weather, emotion, officiating, or chance decide a game. To do that, you must control everything you can, and that meant knowing everything you could. This was not a desire for a competitive advantage. It was a demand for total informational dominance. The systems implemented in that first year, 2000, were the blueprints for the machine to come. Belichick centralized all power. He was the general manager and the head coach. He installed Ernie Adams as the director of football research, giving him a direct line and an opaque mandate. Find an edge. Any edge. Adams's domain expanded. The video department, now under stricter control, was tasked with more than just cutting tape of opponents' games. They were instructed to film everything: sidelines, coaches, substitutions, gestures, from every possible angle. The infamous "do your job" mantra was born here, but its original context was more insidious. It meant focus solely on your narrowly defined task within the system. Do not ask questions about the larger operation. A low-level video assistant was told to film an opponent's sideline for analysis. He was not to question why. He was to do his job. The culture was one of deliberate opacity and unblinking pursuit. Former employees from that era describe a climate of quiet fear and powerful purpose. Communication was compartmentalized. Belichick's infamous terseness with the media wasn't just personality. It was policy. Information was to flow in, not out. Scouts were told to look for specific, often non-traditional traits in players: intelligence, personal background, psychological malleability. Could they fit into, and not question, a system? The 2000 season itself was a mediocre 5-11, but that was irrelevant. The building was not of a winning team, but of a perfect, self-sustaining organism. They were developing the software. The hardware. Tom Brady arrived in the 2000 draft, a sixth-round afterthought who would become the ultimate processor for the intelligence they would gather. By the dawn of the 2001 season, the New England Patriots were no longer a football team in any conventional sense. They were a hybrid entity, part sports team, part research institute, part intelligence agency. They had institutionalized the paranoia of Parcells, the analytical freedom of the Carroll years, and the obsessive comprehensiveness of Belichick and Adams into a single focus beam. The Shadow War, which had been a scattered series of skirmishes for other franchises, was about to become a centralized, strategic operation in Foxborough. They had studied the history of stolen signals, of jamming allegations, of purloined playbooks. They saw not a series of scandals, but a series of inefficient methods. Their goal was to perfect the craft. The stage was set. The system was live. All it needed was a directive to move from passive research to active, illegal collection. That directive would come, and the era of casual, deniable espionage would end, replaced by something far more clinical, disciplined, and devastating. The prelude was over. The main act was waiting in the wings. The system, once activated, operated with a chilling, mundane efficiency. It was not a shadowy cabal meeting in secret, but a procedural task, a line item in the weekly preparation checklist for the New England Patriots video department. Beginning in the 2000 season, the first of the Bill Belichick era, and continuing uninterrupted for 7 years, the Patriots engaged in a systematic, clandestine program to videotape the defensive signals of their opponents. This was not the casual, sideline-eye gamesmanship of the past. This was a formalized, technical operation designed to create a searchable digital library of stolen intelligence. The rationale, from within the Patriots' fortress, was rooted in a warped interpretation of their own philosophy. If every edge mattered, and this edge was obtainable, then obtaining it was not cheating, it was diligence. The shocking scale of this operation would remain hidden until the opening day of the 2007 season, when a single security guard in the Meadowlands, acting on a tip, would look into the lens of a camera pointed in the wrong direction, and the entire architecture of deceit would begin to crumble. The methodology was straightforward. A low-level video assistant, following explicit orders from his superiors, would travel to opposing stadiums with a handheld camera, often a Sony Handycam. His credential identified him as part of the Patriots video staff, which granted him field-level access. His mandate, however, was singular and illicit. He was not to film the action on the field for coaching tape. He was to find a location, often in the vicinity of the opponent's bench, sometimes elevated in the stands, where he could get a clear, steady shot of the defensive coaches sending in their play calls. He would zoom in on their hand signals, their arm movements, the color-coded cards they held. The tape would run continuously. The goal was to capture every defensive signal for the entire game, creating a pristine sideline eye view record. Back in Foxborough, this raw footage entered a processing pipeline. According to former Patriots employees who described the process, the tapes were logged and cataloged by opponent, date, and situation. Video librarians, working under the direction of the Football Research Department, would then sync the stolen signal footage with the standard end zone and sideline game film. The result was a comprehensive decryption key. Now, the coaching staff could watch a play unfold and, with the press of a button, see exactly what defensive signal had been given before the snap. Patterns emerged with crystalline clarity. They could see that when the Dolphins' defensive coordinator touched his cap and then his left hip on third and medium, it was a zone blitz from the weak side. They could see the specific gesture for a Tampa 2 coverage used by the Colts. This was no longer about guessing or spot confirmation. This was about definitive, replayable knowledge. The operations nerve center was the Football Research Department, the domain of Ernie Adams. Adams, whose official title was Director of Football Research, was the theorist behind the practice. His belief, shared by Belichick, was that if a signal was visible to the human eye, recording it was merely an extension of film study. They drew a self-serving distinction. Using a camera to record something anyone could see from the stands was not, in their view, explicitly prohibited, despite a clear 2006 league memo sent to all teams banning the practice. This was the core of their legalistic defense, a willful misinterpretation. They were not hacking encrypted comms. They were filming public gestures. It was a brazen, calculated gambit, betting that the league's enforcement would be weak and that the competitive advantage was worth the risk. For 7 seasons, this bet paid off spectacularly. The library grew. The Patriots' defense, and crucially, their quarterback Tom Brady, played with an increasing aura of prescience. Brady's legendary ability to identify defensive coverages pre-snap and audible to the perfect play was hailed as genius. And much of it was But layered onto that genius was the confidence of confirmed intelligence. When Brady would approach the line, scan the defense, and then change the play with a sharp shout, it was often based on a fusion of his own preparation and the whispered confirmation in his helmet from a coaching staff that had a very good idea of what was coming. The effect was psychological devastation for opponents, who felt outthought in a way that seemed supernatural. The unraveling began, ironically, with the simplest of human emotions, professional jealousy. The tip that reached New York Jets security before their September 9, 2007, season opener against the Patriots did not come from a league official or a random fan. It came, according to multiple sources familiar with the event, from a former Patriots employee, disgruntled over his treatment and termination by the organization. He knew the system, the methods, and the likely location of the spy. Jet security was placed on high alert, instructed to watch for a camera operator where he shouldn't be. Their vigilance was rewarded. Matt Estrella, a Patriots video assistant, was stationed on the Jets sideline, his camera not pointed at the field, but directly at the Jets' defensive coaches. He was detained, and his tape was confiscated. The evidence was undeniable. Hours of footage focused exclusively on Jets defensive coordinator Bob Sutton and his signal callers. When confronted, the Patriots initially claimed it was an innocent mistake, a misunderstanding of the rules. But the tape told a different story, a story of a focused, deliberate act of espionage. Jets head coach Eric Mangini, a former Belichick protege, knew exactly what he was looking at. He had been in those staff meetings. He understood the system. His decision to turn in his mentor was the ultimate act of betrayal within the Shadow War's own family, exposing a secret that the entire league had suspected but could never prove. Commissioner Roger Goodell acted with unprecedented speed and severity. He fined Belichick $500,000, the maximum allowable, fined the Patriots organization $250,000, and stripped them of their 2008 first-round draft pick. The punishment was meant to be definitive, a stake through the heart of the operation. But it was the aftermath that would breed lasting conspiracy. Goodell, in an effort to put the matter to rest, ordered all tapes and notes related to the Patriots spying program destroyed. He did not conduct a wide-ranging investigation into how many games were affected, or whether the practice had tainted the Patriots' 3 Super Bowl victories. The league accepted the Patriots' claim that they had only used the tapes for future games, not the one in which they were recorded, a claim that defies competitive logic. The evidence was incinerated. The historical record was, by the league's own hand, rendered permanently incomplete. The message was clear. The truth was too dangerous to be known. The scandal had a name, Spygate, but its full scope was buried in the ashes of those tapes, leaving only the undeniable fact of systematic cheating and an endless corridor of unanswered questions about what victories, what championships, were built upon its corrupted foundation. The punishment was swift, severe, and historically unprecedented. Commissioner Roger Goodell, only in his second year at the helm, faced the first defining crisis of his tenure. His response was a thunderclap meant to cleanse the league in a single stroke. A $500,000 personal fine for Bill Belichick, the largest ever for a coach. A $250,000 fine for the Patriots organization. The forfeiture of their 2008 first-round draft pick. In a press conference, Goodell declared the matter resolved, his language firm and final. "I believe that this penalty dwarfs any advantage that was gained," he stated. The message was clear. The crime had been discovered, judged, and punished. The NFL, under his stewardship, would police itself with an iron fist. Closure was offered, and the nation's sports media, for the most part, accepted it. The season marched on. The Patriots transformed their exposed scandal into a weaponized us-against-the-world mentality, and finished 16-0. But beneath the official resolution, a corrosive truth was festering. The punishment was not for the act itself, but for getting caught. And the league's subsequent actions were not about uncovering the truth, but about controlling its narrative. The fallout of Spygate was not the fines or the lost draft pick. It was the deliberate institutional cover-up that followed, a cover-up that permanently poisoned the well of the Patriots' legacy and exposed the NFL's priority. Protect the shield, not the sanctity of the game. The most damning element of the entire affair was not the clandestine filming. It was the destruction of the evidence. Upon the league's order, all tapes, notes, and documents related to the Patriots' signal-stealing operation were collected and incinerated at the NFL's offices. Goodell's explanation was that he wanted to prevent the material from finding its way into the public domain, and to ensure the Patriots could not use it again. It was a line of reasoning that collapsed under the slightest scrutiny. The tapes were the central evidence of a multi-year conspiracy to violate league rules. They were the key to understanding the scope. Which games, which opponents, which seasons. By destroying them, Goodell did not preserve competitive integrity. He obliterated the possibility of ever knowing the full truth. He turned the NFL's investigation into a closed room proceeding with no public record, no opportunity for independent review, and no accountability for anything beyond the one game against the Jets in 2007. It was, in the words of former Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter, a conscious strategy to contain the damage. The evidence was not preserved. It was disappeared. Senator Specter, a former prosecutor and avid football fan, found the league's actions inexplicable and suspicious. He launched his own congressional inquiry, demanding answers from Goodell. In a tense meeting and subsequent public letters, Specter eviscerated the commissioner's logic. The NFL's explanation that it destroyed the tapes to avoid their dissemination is nonsense, Specter wrote. They could have been kept in a secure location. This is analogous to the CIA destroying interrogation tapes. It raises the obvious question. What was on the tapes that the NFL was so desperate no one else should see? Specter hypothesized that the tapes likely contained evidence that the cheating extended back to the Patriots' Super Bowl seasons, a fact that would shake the foundations of the league's history and open the door to legal challenges from affected teams and players. Goodell stood firm, offering only the vague assertion that the Patriots had assured him the practice was limited. He was asking the world to trust the word of an organization caught in a lie. Within the league, the fallout bred a deep, enduring bitterness that transcended rivalry. Coaches and executives who had lost close games to the Patriots, particularly in the playoffs, were left with a gnawing, unresolvable doubt. Was their game plan compromised? Did Tom Brady's game-winning drive benefit from a stolen defensive signal? The Patriots' opponents were now prisoners of a historical what-if. Former Indianapolis Colts head coach Tony Dungy, whose team was a chief rival of the Patriots during that era, spoke to the psychic toll. "It changes everything," Dungy said quietly in a later interview. "You look back at those losses, those critical third-down stops they got, those perfect audibles, and you can't help but wonder. The league said it was over, but they took away our ability to ever know for sure. That's the real crime." The Patriots and Belichick's own explanations only deepened the mystery. Belichick's initial claim was a baffling misinterpretation of the rules. Later, a narrative emerged from Patriots apologists that the taping was merely a trivial, widespread practice they had mistakenly continued after a memo. This revisionism was insulting to the intelligence of the sport. The operation was too specific, too disciplined, too valuable to be a clerical error. The true rationale, understood by everyone in the league's inner circle, was that the Patriots, under the philosophy of Ernie Adams and Belichick, believed the rule against recording was stupid, and that their pursuit of total information rendered such petty restrictions irrelevant. They were playing a different game with different rules. The punishment was just the cost of doing business when you got caught. They were playing a different game with different rules. The punishment was just the cost of doing business when you got caught. The lasting questions are the legacy of Spygate. They are unanswerable, and that is the point. Did the stolen signals directly impact the Patriots' 3 Super Bowl victories from 2001 to 2004? Did they affect the epic 2004 AFC Championship victory over the Colts, a game that sent New England to a Super Bowl? What was the true scale of the library destroyed by the NFL? The league's official history records those championships as legitimate. But history is not just a record. It is a story we agree to believe. For a significant portion of the football world, those Lombardi trophies are forever asterisks in the court of public opinion. The Patriots' subsequent success, including championships after the 2007 punishment, exists under this permanent cloud. Every strategic mastery is now filtered through the knowledge of their systemic deceit. Spygate did not end the Patriots dynasty. It merely forced it underground into more sophisticated and less detectable channels. The Shadow War had not been concluded by the League's investigation. It had simply taught its most proficient practitioner to hide his tracks better. And the man who understood this better than anyone was the architect of the entire philosophy, the ghost in the machine, Ernie Adams, whose work was just beginning to be understood. The video department, under his indirect guidance, was not just a service for coaches. It was a research arm. The infamous Spygate tapes were a blunt instrument in this larger pursuit. But Adams's real work was far more subtle and likely far more impactful. The creation of vast, proprietary databases that cross-reference thousands of variables to find exploitable tendencies. Author David Halberstam, in his study of Belichick, captured Adams's role perfectly. He is the keeper of the paradigm, the man who ensures that the Patriots are playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. The psychological impact of this philosophy on opponents cannot be overstated. Playing the Patriots felt, for many, like facing an opponent who had read your diary. Linebacker James Harrison of the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that suffered repeated heartbreaking losses to New England, once voiced a common suspicion. It's not that they're smarter, it's that they know something. You get to a critical third down and they have the perfect play called. Not a good play, the perfect play. And it happens too often to be luck. This aura of omniscience was Adams's ultimate creation. It forced opponents into a recursive trap. To beat the Patriots, you had to be unpredictable. But in trying to be unpredictable, you often abandoned your own strengths, playing directly into New England's hands. The pursuit of maximum information created a state of maximum paralysis in their foes. Adams's defense, therefore, exists in the cold, hard calculus of wins and losses. From his perspective and Belichick's, the results vindicate the methods. The championships, the sustained dominance, the historical legacy, they are the proof of concept. The philosophy treats the NFL rulebook not as a sacred covenant, but as a set of parameters within which to optimize performance. If a rule is poorly defined or poorly enforced, exploiting that ambiguity is not cheating. It is intelligent gamesmanship. His famous question, repeated endlessly in staff meetings, encapsulates his worldview. What do we know? And how do we know it? The philosophy Adams championed and institutionalized is one of maximum information. It posits that uncertainty is the enemy, and that any source of clarity, regardless of its provenance, is a weapon. This is not limited to stealing signals. It is a holistic mandate. It means breaking down film not just to see what an opponent does, but to understand why they do it, down to the footwork of a backup guard in a specific situation. It means compiling meteorological data to predict how a ball will carry in the fourth quarter as dew settles on the field. It means analyzing referee tendencies to understand which holds are likely to be called in a critical moment. And yes, it means that if an opponent chooses to communicate with hand signals in plain view, then recording and decoding those signals is simply another logical, efficient method of data collection. In Adams's world, the ethical lines drawn by the league are arbitrary obstacles to pure understanding. The goal is to reduce the chaotic human game of football to a solvable equation. Espionage in this context is just superior math. Operationally, Adams's influence transformed the Patriots facility into a cross between a library, a trading floor, and a spy agency. Former staffers describe a culture of constant, low-grade interrogation. Adams would appear in offices with a notepad, asking seemingly random questions. What's the average hang time of the opposing punter when he's backed up inside his own 10-yard line? Which wide receiver splits narrow by 3 inches when the play is a screen? The questions were designed to push analysts beyond conventional film study into a realm of predictive analytics. To comprehend the New England Patriots' systematic pursuit of information, one must first attempt to comprehend the most enigmatic figure in modern football history. He has never given a public interview. He rarely appears on camera. He holds the vague title of Director of Football Research. His name is Ernie Adams. Within the Patriots organization, and increasingly within the broader NFL consciousness, he is spoken of in tones ranging from awe to profound suspicion. He is not a coach in the traditional sense. He does not design plays or motivate players. His domain is pure information, its collection, its analysis, and its application. He is the architect of the philosophy that drove the shadow war from a tactical ploy to a strategic imperative. To understand Adams is to understand the Patriots' belief system. That football is not a game of emotion or brute force, but a complex puzzle where every piece of data, no matter how seemingly insignificant, can be the key to victory. His defense, though never spoken publicly, is written in the relentless, detail-obsessed, victory-laden operations of the team he helped build. It is a defense that does not argue morality, but efficacy. Adams and Bill Belichick's relationship is the intellectual bedrock of the Patriots' empire. It began at Phillips Academy in the 1970s, a friendship forged between a coach's son with a fanatical eye for detail and a curious student with a mind for interconnected systems. While Belichick pursued the traditional coaching path, Adams took a more eccentric journey, through Wall Street, through brief coaching stops, through a relentless, personal study of the game's hidden grammar. When Belichick gained power in Cleveland and later New England, his first call was to Adams. Their partnership is perhaps the most symbiotically cerebral in sports history. Belichick is the pragmatic executor, the field marshal. Adams is the theorist, the cryptographer, the man in the laboratory. The infamous deception game memo from the 1970s, which Adams is known to revere, outlined this very principle. Use any means within the rules and probe the edges of those rules to gain an advantage. His life's work has been the rigorous application of that memo. Yet, this defense raises a profound and unsettling question for the sport. If the goal is the ruthless elimination of uncertainty, and if the methods to achieve it exist in a moral gray zone policed by a conflicted league office, then what is the true cost of this kind of victory? Ernie Adams represents the pinnacle of football intellect divorced from football soul. He solved the game, but in doing so, he may have stripped it of its essential human element, the element of chance, of surprise, of honest competition. His legacy is the transformation of the sideline from a place of passionate leadership into a cold intelligence hub. The shadow war found its ultimate philosopher in this quiet, unseen man. And having mastered the art of stealing signals, the next logical step in the pursuit of maximum information was to question the very medium of the game itself. If you could control the environment, the signals, and the data, why not seek to control the very tools the players used? The philosophy was about to descend from the cerebral ether into the stark, physical reality of an underinflated football. The evolution of the shadow war follows a cruel, logical progression. If the theft of hand signals could be punished and the tapes destroyed, then the next frontier had to be untouchable, invisible, and deniable. It had to exist in a realm where evidence was ephemeral and accusation sounded like paranoia. This frontier was the electromagnetic spectrum, the silent highway of radio waves that carry the lifeblood of modern play calling. The allegations that the New England Patriots, and potentially other teams, engaged in the manipulation or interception of opponent coach-to-quarterback radio systems represent the quantum leap in the information war. This was no longer about seeing a signal. It was about invading the private conversation between a coach's mind and his quarterback's ear. It was the difference between reading someone's mail and tapping their phone. The very technology designed to streamline the game became its most vulnerable point of attack, transforming the gridiron into a silent battleground of electronic warfare. The system's vulnerability was an open secret. Since its full implementation in the 1990s, the coach-to-quarterback radio has been a source of constant suspicion. The system is supposed to cut off with 15 seconds remaining on the play clock. The frequencies are supposed to be secured and unique to each team. In reality, the technology was, and to a degree remains, surprisingly rudimentary. Former team communications officials have described it as only marginally more secure than a high-end walkie-talkie. The fear of interception or jamming was so pervasive that teams often used the radio for only the most basic play call, following it with a cascade of dummy hand signals as a precaution. For a philosophy built on maximum information, as dictated by Ernie Adams, this vulnerability was not a concern. It was an opportunity. If you could listen, you could know the play with absolute certainty, in the quarterback's own voice, before he even broke the huddle. The allegations crystallized around two specific, critical games in the mid-2000s, both involving the Patriots and their most formidable AFC rival, the Indianapolis Colts. The first was the 2004 AFC Championship game in Foxborough. The Colts, led by league MVP Peyton Manning, arrived with the most potent offense in football. They left with a 20-3 defeat, a performance so uncharacteristically stifled it bordered on absurd. Manning was confused, hurried, and ineffective. After the game, Colts head coach Tony Dungy and several players hinted at more than defensive excellence. They described a bizarre, persistent issue. Their coach-to-quarterband radio system had malfunctioned repeatedly throughout the game. Manning would come to the sideline, and the coaches would have to relay complex adjustments verbally. Through the crowd noise, a severe disadvantage against a defense that seemed to anticipate their every check. The second and more notorious incident occurred in the 2006 AFC Championship game, also against the Colts. This time, the game was in Indianapolis. Now it was the Colts' defensive radio system that experienced alleged interference. According to multiple sources within the Colts organization that day, head coach Tony Dungy and defensive coordinator Ron Meeks found their communications to linebacker Gary Brackett filled with inexplicable static and cutouts during critical defensive series in the first half. The issue was not constant, but intermittent, striking at moments of tactical adjustment. The Patriots, meanwhile, executed several key third-down conversions with Tom Brady audibling at the line, seemingly unfazed by the defensive looks. The Colts switched to a backup frequency at halftime, and the problems reportedly ceased. They mounted a historic second-half comeback to win the game, a fact often used to dismiss the allegations. But for those involved, the first-half issues were not forgotten. They were evidence of a pattern. These were not isolated complaints. Coaches and equipment managers from multiple teams began speaking in hushed tones about Foxborough static. Former Cleveland Browns head coach Romeo Crennel, a former Belichick assistant, admitted to reporters in 2005 that he always expected communication problems in New England. "You just plan for it," he said, a stunning admission of accepted dysfunction. An equipment manager for the Pittsburgh Steelers, speaking anonymously years later, described a specific protocol for games at Gillette Stadium. "We'd bring extra battery packs, extra receivers. We'd scan for clean frequencies during warm-ups. It was the only place where we'd have to physically shield the quarterback's helmet with our bodies on the sideline to get a clear signal. It felt intentional." The NFL's response to these growing allegations was a masterclass in passive indifference. League officials would quietly replace equipment or suggest better shielding. They would never, ever entertain the possibility of foul play. To do so would be to admit that the integrity of their own fundamental game day technology was compromised. A full investigation would require forensic analysis of radio equipment, scrutiny of stadium wiring, and a confrontation with the most powerful dynasty in the sport. It was a Pandora's box the league refused to open. Their stance created a perverse reality. The victim was made to feel like a winner, while the potential perpetrator operated under a veil of plausible deniability. The championship implications were staggering. If true, these actions did not just steal a play. They could steal the rhythm, the confidence, and the strategic nerve of an entire team during the most important moments of the season. The radio defense scandal represents the Shadow War's most sophisticated and chilling chapter. It required technical knowledge, precise timing, and a willingness to sabotage the game's essential infrastructure. It was espionage with a dial and a frequency scanner. For the Patriots, operating under the Adams Doctrine, it would have been the ultimate expression of leaving nothing to chance. Why try to decode a hand signal when you could simply listen to the command as it was given? The static was the weapon, a digital fog of war selectively deployed. It created the exact psychological environment the Patriots thrived in, one of opponent confusion and self-doubt. This escalation demonstrated that no channel of information was sacred. Having allegedly probed the auditory realm, the next logical step in the relentless pursuit of an edge was not to target communication about the game, but to manipulate the physical object of the game itself. If you could influence the environment and intercept the commands, why not tailor the very tool the quarterback used to execute them? The philosophy of maximum information was about to contract from the expansive, invisible world of radio waves to the intimate, tactile world of leather and air pressure. The electronic fog would give way to a more tangible and ultimately more publicly combustible form of manipulation. The stage was set for a scandal that would, for the first time, give the abstract shadow war a simple, graspable, and perfect name: Deflategate. Deflategate was never about air pressure. Not really. To reduce the scandal that consumed the NFL for nearly 2 years to a matter of pounds per square inch is to miss its profound, symbolic resonance entirely. The 11 underinflated footballs discovered at halftime of the 2014 AFC Championship game were not merely pieces of improperly gauged equipment. They were physical manifestations of a deeper, more corrosive philosophy. They were messages sent not in radio waves or hand signals, but in the very texture and grip of the game ball itself. This was the shadow war contracting from the grand, electronic scale of frequency jamming to the intimate, tactile scale of palm and finger. It was a scandal of feel, not just of physics. And in that intimacy lay its true purpose: to extend the battlefield into the quarterback's mind and the opponent's morale, to weaponize comfort, and to signal that no variable, no matter how minute, was beyond manipulation in the pursuit of total control. Deflategate was the ultimate expression of a mindset that believed if you could control the environment, the signals, and the communication, why not control the tool itself? The science of the football is deeply personal to a quarterback. The feel of the leather, the tightness of the laces, the subtle give of the bladder. These are sensory inputs as critical to performance as visual recognition of a defense. Since 2006, NFL rules had allowed each team to provide their own footballs for use when their offense was on the field, a rule championed by none other than Peyton Manning. This was seen as a nod to the artistry of the position. For Tom Brady, the preference was well documented. A ball on the lower end of the league's permissible pressure range, 12.5 to 13.5 psi, broken into a specific softness with a tacky, grippy surface. A softer ball is easier to grip, especially in cold, wet conditions like those at Gillette Stadium that January night. It is easier to catch, easier to throw with velocity and control. It is, in essence, a performance enhancer. The allegations, following the Patriots' 45-7 victory over the Indianapolis Colts, were stark. Colts linebacker D'Qwell Jackson, after intercepting a Brady pass in the first half, felt the ball was suspiciously soft and alerted equipment staff. At halftime, league officials tested the Patriots' game balls and found 11 of them significantly under the legal limit. The immediate, visceral reaction across the football world was one of weary recognition. Not shock, but a grim, of course. Here was the Patriot way, distilled to its essence. Find an obscure rule, probe its enforcement, and exploit the margin for competitive gain. This wasn't stealing signals. It was tailoring the instrument. The explanation from the Patriots and Brady, a natural loss of pressure due to the cold, combined with an innocent misunderstanding of the gauges, was met with widespread derision. The science, debated endlessly, was complex and contradictory. But the narrative was clear. This was not an accident. It was a habit. The Wells report, the league's costly and controversial investigation, concluded it was more probable than not that Patriots personnel had deliberately deflated the balls and that Tom Brady was at least generally aware of the scheme. The punishment was another seismic strike. A 4-game suspension for Brady, a $1 million fine for the team, and the loss of a first and fourth-round draft pick. Yet, the true significance of Deflategate lay not in the punishment, but in the psychological warfare it revealed. This was a scandal about feel, about a quarterback's unspoken comfort. By allegedly ensuring the footballs met his precise, illegal specification, the Patriots were not just gaining a physical edge. They were conducting a profound psychological operation. They were telling Brady, "We have removed one more variable. The ball in your hand is perfect." They were simultaneously telling the Colts defense, subliminally, "Even the object you are trying to take is tailored for our success." It was a meta-signal, a statement of dominance that whispered of control so complete it extended to the molecular level. The fight that followed, the legal battles, the suspension overturned then reinstated, the fiery rhetoric, was all spectacle. It obscured the core truth. Deflategate was the logical endpoint of the philosophy Ernie Adams had architected. When you seek maximum information and control, you eventually seek to control the constants of the game itself. The football is the ultimate constant. Manipulating it was the final step in constructing a perfectly calibrated environment for one's own quarterback and a subtly destabilized one for the opponent. Every dropped interception by a Colts defender, every perfect spiral from Brady in the freezing rain, would now be viewed through the lens of that alleged manipulation. It robbed the victory of its purity, not because the deflation won the game. The Patriots dominated the second half with regulation balls, but because it cast a shadow over the very authenticity of the contest. Were the Patriots competing, or were they curating? The league's fierce, disproportionate response to Deflategate, compared to its handling of Spygate or the radio allegations, is telling. This was a cheat they could understand, measure, and explain to the public. It was a tangible crime with a tangible object. It allowed Commissioner Roger Goodell to posture as a fierce defender of integrity, attacking a solvable physical problem while the larger, systemic corruption of the informational war continued unchecked. Deflategate became a convenient distraction, a morality play about balls and air, while the deeper, more insidious virus of systemic espionage remained unaddressed. In the end, Deflategate was the Shadow War's most public and most misunderstood battle. It was a signal of a different kind. It proved that the pursuit of an edge had moved beyond the intellectual realm of stolen codes and into the physical realm of engineered advantage. It demonstrated that, for the Patriot system, no detail was too small, no rule too picayune to exploit. The football was no longer just a football. It was a vessel for a message of total dominance. It said, "We control everything," and in doing so, it raised the most damning question of all. If you must control everything to win, what exactly are you winning? The answer seemed to be a trophy forever scrutinized, a legacy forever debated, and a game forever diminished by the relentless, joyless pursuit of its own deconstruction. With the physical and psychological realms fully integrated into the war for advantage, the final frontier was the digital, the algorithmic, the vast unseen world of data where the next generation of secrets would be hidden not in film cans or ball pressures, but in lines of code and patterns invisible to the human eye. The advantage is clear, deniable, and built into the very infrastructure of the sport. Yet, this cold, digital arms race completes the journey that began with a coach squinting at a sideline decades ago. It reduces the beautiful, chaotic human drama of football to a series of optimizable variables. It creates a world where victory may belong not to the bravest, strongest, or most creative, but to the organization with the most sophisticated processing power and the fewest ethical constraints. The pursuit of total information has achieved a form of sterile perfection. And in that perfection lies a final, haunting question. When you can quantify and predict everything, what space remains for the soul of the game? The answer may be written in the lost legacies and tarnished trophies of the past, the human cost of a war that has finally evolved beyond the need for human hands. The Shadow War's combatants are no longer coaches with binoculars, but data scientists with PhDs, writing code to find the hidden cracks in an opponent's performance armor. The film analysis room, once a place of whiteboards and VHS tapes, is now a situation room worthy of an intelligence agency. Teams employ staffs of dozens whose sole job is to code, or tag, every single frame of every game. They don't just tag plays, they tag personnel, formations, motions, defensive fronts, coverage shells, blitz packages, and individual player techniques. This creates searchable databases of staggering complexity. A defensive coordinator can now query, "Show me every third and 4 to 6 yards against this opponent in the last 2 seasons when they are in 11 personnel, with the running back offset to the quarterback's left, against a nickel defense showing a double-a-gap blitz look before rotating to cover 3. The result is not a theory. It is a statistical probability. The algorithm can then suggest the most successful historical counter, turning a coach's intuition into a data-driven directive. The line between preparation and prescience blurs entirely. This technological leap has birthed new, ethically fraught industries on the periphery of the game. Private firms, staffed by former team analysts, now sell advanced scouting services to NFL teams. These firms do not provide traditional written reports. They sell access to their own colossal, league-wide databases and proprietary algorithms. For a fee, a team can effectively Google their opponent. The legal firewall is thin. These firms operate independently, gathering all their data from publicly available broadcast footage, the so-called All-22 film the league provides to teams and media. But their synthesis creates a product that is, in essence, a dossier of an opponent's soul, compiled by a third party, circumventing any league rules about inter-team espionage. It is outsourcing the shadow war. The shadow war has entered its silent age. The clandestine film crews, the mysterious frequency static, the manipulated footballs. These were the crude instruments of an analog struggle. Today, the battlefield is immaterial. It exists in server farms, in proprietary algorithms, in the silent, ceaseless flow of data points captured by high-definition cameras embedded in stadium rafters. The pursuit of maximum information has found its ultimate expression not in the daring theft of a single signal, but in the wholesale mining of a limitless digital landscape. The modern algorithm does not guess. It calculates. It does not spy, it absorbs. And in doing so, it has transformed espionage from a risky, personnel-driven operation into a clean, bureaucratic, and terrifyingly efficient science. The new frontier of information gathering is not about stealing secrets, but about owning the very reality of the game itself, quantified and predicted before a single player takes the field. This revolution is built on the back of the NFL's own technological embrace. The league's installation of the RFID tracking system, marketed as Next-Gen Stats, was a watershed moment. Tiny chips embedded in shoulder pads now record every player's location, speed, acceleration, and distance traveled 25 times per second. For broadcasters, this data creates flashy graphics. For team analysts, it is a goldmine of unprecedented depth. The game is no longer a film to be studied. It is a massive, interactive dataset to be queried. Algorithms can now identify tendencies invisible to the human eye, the slight 3-inch lean of a guard stance that predicts a run direction, the precise top speed a cornerback reaches when transitioning from backpedal to sprint, the exact distance a safety lines up from the hash mark when a blitz is imminent. This is no longer pattern recognition, it is biometric forensics. Furthermore, the rise of player wearables in practice, tracking heart rate, workload, muscle fatigue, creates another vulnerable data stream. While teams fiercely protect this information, the fear of sophisticated hacking or insider leaks is a constant, unspoken anxiety. An opponent knowing your quarterback's throwing velocity dropped 2% in Wednesday's practice is a strategic advantage of terrifying specificity. The most profound evolution, however, lies in predictive modeling. Machine learning systems are now being trained not just to describe what happened, but to predict what will happen. By ingesting millions of data points, down, distance, field position, time, personnel, historical tendencies, even weather algorithms are beginning to forecast play calls with alarming accuracy. I spoke with a data scientist who worked for an NFC team until 2020. He described a prototype system. We could input the situation, he told me, his voice still bearing the quiet thrill of creation. 2nd and 8, opponent's own 35, 147 left in the half, 2 timeouts, nickel defense on the field. The model would output a probability distribution, 42% chance of an outside zone run, 31% chance of a quick game pass, 18% chance of a play-action deep shot, and so on. It wasn't perfect, but it was right more than a seasoned coach's gut. And it was learning, getting better every week. This is the final subversion of the signal. Why bother stealing the call if a computer can tell you what the call is likely to be, based on a million previous decisions? The opponent's strategic mind is no longer a secret to be stolen. It is a predictable output to be computed. The modern algorithm represents both the pinnacle of football intelligence and its deepest moral vacuum. It has sanitized the shadow war, removing the dirt and risk of the physical world. There are no tapes to burn, no frequencies to jam, no footballs to doctor. There is only code, data, and probability. The final score is immutable. The trophy is engraved. The banner hangs from the rafters, and the rings glitter in their cases. This is the official history of the National Football League, a record carved in the granite of wins and losses. But history is not just what happened. It is also what was taken, what was lost in the dark spaces between plays. The unseen legacy of the Shadow War is not measured in fines or suspensions, but in the alternate timelines that were erased, the careers that were prematurely capped, the trust that was incinerated, and the nagging, unanswerable doubt that hangs over the sport's most sacred moments. We are left with a historical record we can never fully trust, a museum of achievements where the placards beneath the exhibits maybe lies. The tangible impact is a landscape of ghosts, ghosts of victories that might have been, of legacies that should have been, of a game's soul compromised. Begin with the most direct victims, the teams that stood on the opposite sideline. The 1998 New York Jets, denied a trip to the Super Bowl by a Denver Broncos team accused of electronic interference. Does the black box allegation, forever unproven but eternally plausible, transform that AFC championship from a loss into a theft? For the players on that Jets defense, men like M.O. Lewis and Bill Belichick himself, the question lingers, a bitter taste that no amount of time can wash away. Their one best shot at a ring was potentially sabotaged not by a better play, but by a corrupted signal. Move to the early 2000s Indianapolis Colts, a team built around Peyton Manning's historic brilliance. They faced the Patriots in 2 AFC championship games, in 2003 and 2004, losing both. We now know those Patriot teams were engaged in a systematic signal-stealing program. How many of Manning's critical interceptions in those games were the result of a defense that knew what was coming? The Colts finally broke through in 2006, but the narrative of Manning versus Brady was permanently skewed. Without Spygate, does Manning have another ring? Does his legacy, and that of his teammates like Marvin Harrison and Jaron James, ascend even higher? The question isn't just academic. It's a hole in the resume of greatness. The ripple effect extends to franchises and their fans. The Pittsburgh Steelers of the Ben Roethlisberger era lost 3 AFC championship games to the Patriots in 2001, 2004, and 2016. Each was agonizingly close. Each featured moments of Tom Brady prescience that were chalked up to genius. Knowing what we know now, how do the citizens of Pittsburgh view those losses? Not as defeats, but as potential robberies. The same echoes in San Diego, where the Chargers' own offensive system was allegedly co-opted by Denver to build a dynasty that blocked their path. For these cities and their loyalists, the Shadow War stole more than games. It stole moments of communal joy, civic pride, and the pure, uncomplicated faith that the best team won. Their history is one of subtraction. Then, there are the individual careers, forever frozen in a different light. Take the case of a quarterback like Drew Bledsoe. He was the Patriots franchise cornerstone, the #1 overall pick, until he was injured and replaced by the 6th-round rookie, Tom Brady. Brady's rise is the stuff of legend. But his early success, his ability to command the offense as a young player, was attributed to otherworldly preparation and football IQ. With the revelation of a systemic spying operation that provided a schematic cheat sheet, does the legend dim? Does Brady's early mastery become, in part, a function of stolen information? This doesn't diminish his otherworldly talent and work ethic, but it irrevocably clouds its origins. For a player like former Jets quarterback Chad Pennington, a precise and intelligent player whose physical gifts were limited, the margin for error was zero. If the Patriots knew his audibles and his checks, it turned his greatest strength into a fatal weakness. It didn't just beat him. It made him appear less than he was, potentially shortening his tenure as a starter and altering how he is remembered. The legacy extends to the very culture of the sport. The Shadow War created a generation of coaches and executives steeped in paranoia, who view the rulebook not as a covenant but as a challenge. It normalized deceit. Young coaches entering the league learned that getting an edge was the paramount virtue, and that the lines were there to be probed. This eroded the fundamental concept of sportsmanship, replacing it with a cold, win-at-all-costs calculus. The joy of competition, the belief that two entities are testing themselves on a level field, has been replaced for many insiders by the grim satisfaction of having outmaneuvered, outspied, and outcheated the other side. The game became a business in the most cynical sense, where ethics are a liability. Perhaps the most profound casualty is trust. Fans can no longer watch a stunning defensive play or a perfect offensive check without a flicker of suspicion. Was that brilliance, or was it burglary? The league office has forfeited its role as an honest broker. Its destruction of the Spygate evidence, Its timid investigation of radio frequency allegations and its often arbitrary punishment system have revealed an institution more concerned with managing headlines than enforcing integrity. We cannot trust the league to tell us the truth about its own history. This fractures the shared reality between the fan and the sport. We are no longer witnessing a pure contest. We are witnessing a production, one where the behind-the-scenes machinations may determine the outcome more than the acts on stage. The New England Patriots dynasty stands as the central, conflicted monument to this era. Their 6 championships are facts. The talent of Tom Brady, the coaching of Bill Belichick are undeniable, but they are now viewed through a permanent lens of skepticism. Their achievements are a palimpsest, with the faint, troubling text of Spygate, Deflategate, and whispered radio scandals visible beneath the ink of their victories. Their legacy is one of both unparalleled success and profound moral ambiguity. They solved the puzzle of the NFL, but the solution involved breaking the puzzle box. They are the greatest winners in modern sports, and their triumphs are forever shadowed by the question: how much did they win, and how much did they take? This is the unseen legacy. It is not a statistic. It is a void. It is the silence where the cheers of another city should have been. It is the emptiness in a display case where a different ring could have rested. It is the quiet doubt in the mind of a Hall of Fame player when he looks back on his defining defeat. The Shadow War proved that in the NFL, history is written not just by the victors, but by those who control the information. They have written a version of events that glorifies their conquest. But the true history, the one of lost opportunities and shattered faith, is written in the hearts of those who played by the rules and lost to those who did not. It is a history we can't rewrite, but one we are finally, painfully learning to read. We began this journey with a spiral, that perfect geometric shape arcing through the air, a symbol of order and intention. We end in the mud and the static, in the stolen glance and the deleted tape, in the quiet of a life altered forever by secrets traded on a sideline. The spiral was the promise of the game, the beauty, the athleticism, the clarity of competition. The Shadow War is its reality, a relentless, grinding conflict where the pursuit of victory has repeatedly corrupted the very idea of fair play. Over the course of this investigation, we have traced the evolution of a disease within the body of professional football. It began as a germ of gamesmanship, a human eye squinting to decipher a hand signal. It grew into a systemic infection under the Steelers' clinical decoding, was weaponized by the paranoia that answered Bill Walsh's genius, and became a technological arms race with the Bills' No-Huddle offense. It was institutionalized on every sideline with the get-back coach, brutalized through allegations of electronic warfare in Denver and New York, and found its most perfect, disciplined expression in the football research laboratory of Ernie Adams and Bill Belichick in New England. It survived exposure, adapted, and now thrives in the sterile, digital realm of algorithms and data mining. This is not a story of a few bad actors. This is the story of the NFL itself, an ecosystem that incentivized, tolerated, and ultimately normalized deceit as a core competitive strategy. The central, unanswerable question this history forces upon us is devastatingly simple. What is a championship? Is it a testament to superior skill, strategy, and will? Or is it the endpoint of a clandestine operation, the trophy a piece of evidence in a heist? The NFL's official record book is a ledger of results, but it is not a ledger of truth. It lists the New England Patriots as 6-time Super Bowl champions. It does not note that the first 3 were achieved during a years-long campaign of illegal signal theft, the evidence for which was destroyed by the league. It lists the Denver Broncos as back-to-back champions in 1997 and 1998. It does not note that those titles are shadowed by credible allegations of stolen intellectual property and electronic interference so concerning it prompted a congressional inquiry. The record book is a facade. Behind it lies the true history, one of asterisks and anguish, of rings that feel heavy with more than gold. This corruption is systemic because the league allowed it to be. The NFL's governance has been a study in negligent facilitation. Its responses, when they came at all, were not designed to eradicate cheating, but to manage the public relations fallout. The destruction of the Spygate tapes was not justice. It was containment. The timid fines for frequency interference were not deterrence. They were licensing fees. The fierce punishment for Deflategate was not principled enforcement. It was a desperate overcorrection, a chance to look tough on a tangible, graspable crime while the larger, more insidious virus of informational theft continued to mutate. The league prioritized the protection of its brand, the shield, over the sanctity of its sport. In doing so, it sent a clear message to every owner, general manager, and coach. The risk of cheating is not moral condemnation. It is a cost-benefit analysis. If the fine is less than the value of a championship, and if the evidence can be buried, then the calculation is clear. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed, rewarding audacity and punishing only carelessness. The human cost of this equation is etched in the lives of the men who played the game. We opened with the concept of the final season, the point where a player's mind and body were irrevocably altered. The Shadow War directly contributed to those final seasons. When a linebacker knows the run play because of a stolen signal, he does not just fill a gap. He arrives at the point of attack with lethal, amplified force. He becomes a targeted weapon. The quarterback holding the ball a half-second longer, the receiver cutting across the middle on a known route. They become prey. The physical violence of football is catastrophic on a level playing field. When that field is tilted by foreknowledge, the violence becomes predictive and precise, increasing the risk of the catastrophic, career-ending, life-altering hit. The stolen signal isn't just a strategic advantage. It is a potential instrument of physical ruin. The men who suffered concussions, spinal injuries, and chronic pain on plays that were known before the snap were not just defeated. They were betrayed by a game that allowed their vulnerabilities to be mapped and exploited. For the fan, the legacy is a profound erosion of faith. We are the consumers of the myth. We buy the jerseys, roar at the touchdowns, and invest our emotional lives in the narrative of seasons. The Shadow War turns our passion into a kind of naivete. It reveals our celebration to be, potentially, a celebration of a magician's trick, not an athlete's triumph. The magical moments we replay in our minds, the David Tyree helmet catch, the Malcolm Butler interception, retain their power because they feel like spontaneous eruptions of destiny. But how many other moments, just as crucial, were the product of a stolen checkdown or a decrypted tendency? The joy of sports is the joy of witnessing authentic excellence under pressure. The Shadow War inserts a silent, corrosive question into that joy. Was it real? It transforms the stadium from a coliseum of honest struggle into a soundstage for a production where the script may have been leaked. Our trust has been broken not by one team, but by the very institution that asks for our devotion. So, where does this leave us? With a sport at a crossroads, its past clouded and its future uncertain. The technological genie cannot be put back in the bottle. The algorithmic arms race will only accelerate. The pursuit of maximum information is now the central, unshakable tenet of professional football. The question is whether the league will have the courage to impose not just rules, but truly punitive, culture-shifting consequences for those who break them in the pursuit of that information. It must shift the cost-benefit analysis from, is it worth the risk? To, this will end your career. This requires transparency it has always refused and an integrity it has historically lacked. In the end, the NFL dark side is not a place. It is a condition. It is the space between the rule and its enforcement, between the signal sent and the signal stolen, between the history written and the history lived. It is the void where integrity was traded for advantage, where the brilliance of coaches like Walsh and Belichick became intertwined with a pathology of possession, where the physical sacrifice of players was compounded by intellectual theft. The spiral remains beautiful. The game, in its pure form, is still a breathtaking spectacle of human potential. But we can no longer watch it with innocent eyes. We now know that for decades, beneath the roar of the crowd and the clash of helmets, there has been a quieter, more relentless sound. The whisper of secrets being traded, the click of a camera recording what it shouldn't, the hum of a frequency being scanned, the silent calculation of an algorithm determining destiny before the play even begins. We know that some championships were not just won, they were taken, and that knowledge changes everything. The final whistle blows, the confetti falls, but the victory, once a pure and shining thing, now casts a long, complex, and troubling shadow.